And we're live.
Superman. Thanks to Zane Miller, who is working the director booth for us again today. Hello and welcome once again to the Cult of Copy show, which we record new episodes of Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, contrary to what you may have heard. Um, my name is Colin Terrio, as you can see if you're watching on video. I got a little lower third deal down here below my lovely mug. I am the leader of a discussion group called the Cult of Copy. If you go to cultofcopy.com, again, the URL is below my lovely face here. You can join that discussion group. Currently, we're on Facebook. We have 7,300 members, something like that, as of today, which is crazy because we just broke 7,000 members last week. But I digress. Anyway, we're dedicated to discussing copywriting and persuasion and that sort of thing, and that's the point of this show, is discussing it on a lovely live interactive show like this one. New episodes of this show, like we said, I film them live weekly, Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. And previous episodes are available currently at youtube.com/cultofcopy, which is the show's URL. Eventually, we will get these stripped out to audio only, and they will be available as an audio-only podcast on iTunes, Android, and anywhere else I can manage to upload them. No matter which format you're listening to, if you do like the show, I do ask that you click subscribe via whatever mechanism you prefer to enjoy the show, and that's that. That's all about me, all about the show, and all about our lovely organization, the Cult of Copy. As you may have seen from the promotional material that hopefully led you here to join us live today, today we're going to be talking about what I think of as one of the most important keys to marketing and persuasion that no one knows about or talks about, and I didn't used to know about or talk about it because I didn't used to have a word for it. It's something I knew about as an effect, as an idea, as a concept, but it's certainly a lot easier once you have a word for it. This concept is called exformation. And what exformation is, it's basically not information, right? That sounds a little weird, but if you have a message of any kind that you're sending to an audience, information is what's in the actual message, right? The words on the page that anyone reading would be able to pick up. Exformation is special information that comes from inside the mind of the reader that for whatever reason they have already. So that information in their mind, the exformation, informs whatever it is they are reading that you've sent to them, right? It's things that they know about you as the author, things they know about the context, stuff that's not in the actual message. So people that aren't in the know maybe don't read that message in the same way. But this mechanism has always been very interesting to me because back when I was a freelance copywriter, even when I was a staff copywriter for a marketing company, what I found very interesting was that some of the most persuasive, effective communicators seemed to not have to say very much at all to get their audience to take the desired action that they wanted them to take. As a writer trying to learn how to be persuasive, this is very frustrating because you can't copy what isn't there, right? So if some marketer can get behind the promotion and send a 4 or 5 word email to his marketing list and say, hey, I think you guys will like this, check it out, and just give a link, and that guy ends up being like the #1 affiliate as far as sales are concerned, how do you explain that? How do you replicate it? How do you copy that? Because there's nothing in the actual message that you can copy. If you send that same message to your own audience, will it produce the same result? Not if you don't have that same relationship with your audience, and that relationship is what develops this content we call exformation. And if you're really good at loading up your audience with exformation, this powerful amount of content that goes without saying that you don't need to re-mention, all you have to do is make it clear that the message is from you, all of this internal information in their head about who you are, what you represent, what you've done, all of those things come into play when applied to the message. The word exformation comes from, I believe he's a sociologist, and I did not do my adequate research before the show. I remember his first name is Tor, like Tor, like Thor. Um, I can't remember his last name. I apologize. He's a sociologist. He coined the term to explain decision-making processes, and he's given talks and things about it if you want to look him up online. But as applies to marketing, I really don't know of anyone that talks about the concept of exformation in marketing, but basically the whole idea of branding is the creation and embedding of exformational content in the audience's mind, so that later on, when they see partial or fragmentary messages related to that brand, all of the goodwill, all of the uh, understanding of the authority and the positioning and the messaging, all of those things come rushing back to the forefront of their mind so that they contextualize that message the way that you want them to. A famous story that you can use to sort of understand what exformation is the author Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables, which I guess was up for a few Oscars not too long ago. I guess it was a couple of years ago now. They made a film of the musical, which is based on the book written by this French guy, Victor Hugo. And the novel is contemporary to, in America here, it would be in the Civil War era. In fact, it was a very popular novel among all Civil War soldiers, but in particular soldiers in the Confederacy. Trivia, part of that has to do with the fact that it's a really long and thick novel, so it had a lot of paper. So it could be used as reading material, and then you could use the sheets of paper as toilet paper that you had already read. So it was a handy thing to carry around. It was very popular. So anyway, Victor has an American publisher who's translated his novel into English and publishing it in America. He is sending an international telegram to his American publisher to see how sales are going. Telegrams, as you may know, or may not, obviously it's a precursor technology. They would send messages via Morse code on wires that would be translated from text into Morse code, and then from Morse code back into text, and then the telegram would be delivered in paper format to whoever it was supposed to be sent to. The trick was you paid by the word when you sent a telegram, so it was cheaper to use as few words as possible. It was literally like the text messaging of the day if you pay rates for sending text messages. So Victor, being the frugal gentleman that he is, sends a one-character telegram to his publisher in America to see how sales are doing. All it is a question mark, a single question mark. That's it. Sent to his publisher. Publisher sees the telegram, happens to know exactly what Victor is talking about because he knows who Victor is, he knows what the situation is, he knows what Victor would even be asking about with the question mark. So he sends back a one-character response, which is an exclamation point, because sales were doing incredibly well. Victor is the only person who would be able to translate what that message actually means, because he knows who sent it back to him. He knows what question he asked. He knows the context of it. Anyone else looking at that communication, just one question mark, responded to with an exclamation point, does not have the information required to translate that message into something meaningful. They just don't have it. It's not there. It's not in the information. It only exists in exformation, which for those of you listening in the audio version of this later on, I was just pointing to my noggin. All of that information lives inside your head. By the way, to just throw this out there, I can see our director, Zane, in a little image at the bottom of the screen. I see him laughing at my jokes. That's very helpful to have an audience that laughs at my jokes. Anyways, that gives you an idea of what exformation is. It's the stuff in your head that's going to give context and meaning to messages that you read if those clues are there. Hopefully you can see why this is very powerful, but to say it explicitly if you don't understand why exformation can be so persuasive and moving, if something comes from your own head, you think it's your own idea, right? You feel like those parts of the message are coming from you. You are adding that context into the message that you're reading. it doesn't matter if I gave you that information earlier on and you turned it into exformation. At the point where I'm trying to pull it out of you and make it come into play and influence what it is you're doing and behaving according to what I'm asking you, everything that's coming from your own head at that moment feels like it was your own idea. I didn't have to re-say it to you. I didn't have to re-deliver it. If you bring it out of your own brain and put it into the context of the conversation we're having, those are your inclinations, those are your beliefs, those are your conclusions in the context of the conversation we're having. That can be incredibly powerful in marketing contexts, and that's why big branding marketing actually works. So if you see a commercial that all you catch is a slim sliver of content, like say from something massive that has a huge advertising budget like McDonald's, you can hear the jingle for "I'm loving it." Da 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 da. What are they even still using that now? I have no idea. But that's the one that's stuck in my head. You hear that whether it's on the radio or on TV or whatever, and if you happen to like McDonald's, that might trigger all of this other stuff that's already in your head about the context of McDonald's, and that just that jingle alone is enough to make you think, okay, well, I've decided what I'm having for lunch today, if you're so inclined. That's how branding works. That's what the accumulation factor is actually building up. It's all of this good feeling and memory, and we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail, because as you may be thinking now, if you are like I am, a solo entrepreneur or a small business person, you're like, well, that's great. I don't have a huge McDonald's or Coca-Cola or Walmart-esque budget to throw this kind of stuff out there so that people pick it up and consume it, internalize it, save it in their brain as exformation, and then reapply it to future messages. So how do we do that? That's really what we're here today to talk about, is how you and me and other people in our genre can use this kind of exformational content to drive people to do what we want them to do, which for my purposes is usually to buy stuff, whether it's from me or from my clients, helping them do the same thing. Hopefully this is useful to you, but keep in mind, even though we're talking about marketing from a practical standpoint today, you can really use exformational content in all kinds of contexts. You know, dealing with coworkers, dealing with your employers, dealing with family members, friends. I know people actually got some complaints from previous content I've done where I suggest that people manipulate their friends. Look, we all do it. Even if you don't want to own up to it, maybe you don't think of it as manipulation, but you know, even if you're like, hey, I want to go to this bar and drink tonight versus that bar, if you really want your way, if you really care, being persuasive helps. I always get to drink at the bar I want to drink at because I make a good argument. Let's see. Going through my notes, exformation. We covered who named it, Thor something or other. We covered what it is.
There's I think we've got a comment. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think, yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, and you're seeing it backwards too, but the audience can see it.
Okay, Tor Nortanders in his book The User Illusion.
There we go.
I'm slaughtering that name probably.
Okay.
It's the letter O with a little slash through it, which I only know from the opening sequence of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. When they use it to talk about mooses and things. Anyway, I'm presuming it's Nordic of some variety, but Tor Noratranders in The User Illusion. Thanks, Michael Thorsett, for putting that out there. That is who coined it. So that's who named the term exformation, but he is not a marketer. As far as I know, I'm one of the only people who talk about this in terms of marketing. We talked about what it is. I gave you the Victor Hugo story. We talked about what it's valuable. Now let's talk about uploads, meaning what kind of information can you upload into your audience's brain in order to do this exformational content. What kind of things do we want to jam in there so that later on when we just say, hey, check this out, all of these valuable things come rushing to the forefront to give them context to that message. First and foremost would be reputation, right? What is your reputation in your market? Are you well known? Are you a public figure? Do you have a large audience? Do you frequently communicate in a visible and public way? For example, a show like this one. You'll notice I told you the size of the cult of copy at the beginning of the show. Sometimes I even mention that we have that many members in 90 countries and all 50 US states and territories. That kind of thing lends context. And I don't necessarily intend for you to react to it just then because I'm not asking you for anything. But later on, when you think about my group, the Cult of Copy, the fact that I told you how big it is a factor in what you may decide to do later, right? And this may seem self-explanatory, like, oh, well, of course I remember facts that you told me, but it's very important to remember this idea of I'm delivering you information in one message, and I want you to retain it, so I'm probably going to repeat it a lot of times in multiple messages, so that later on, when I don't repeat it to you, I can be sure that you're going to remember it and it's going to influence what you're thinking of, right? So reputation is one. Another way you can embed your reputation into people's minds is with testimonials. So anytime you've had a client or a customer talk well about you, circulate it, quote them. If they do it on social media, it's great because then you can just share exactly what they said and it's obvious that you didn't do it, right? Videos of people talking well about you. Anytime somebody says something nice, if you follow me on Facebook, you may see me do that from time to time while I'll say, you know, so-and-so got in touch about this episode of the show. They said this. Check it out. Reputation. Also, you have authority. So if you have any kind of claims of authority in your market, you're an expert, you've been doing this a certain number of years, you're at the top of your field, you're sought after, you charge very high prices, whatever the case may be, if you have some kind of authority, maybe you went to school for a long time and you have a degree, or maybe you just bought some fake degrees off of the internet like I have up here. Like there's my knighthood and there's my doctorate of esoteric psychology, which apparently has to do with astral projection. I don't know. It was just the option that sounded the coolest when I gave them my $70 to get the diploma. Then there's my minister's license. By the way, if anyone wants any wedding ceremonies, I'm licensed to do so in all 50 states. But those are authority hooks, right? Like now I've joked and I've told you those things. And if you watch, by the way, if you're listening on audio, I'm pointing to these diplomas that I have framed on my mantle behind me on the video version of the show. I've mentioned these things, and in the future, if you've listened to this episode, those kind of things you can't help it. They're just stuck in your head as relates to me as a person, as a provider of information. You can't help but disassociate but associate those authority markers to me. Also, the fact that I lead this group, the fact that I have this show, the fact that I seem to know what I'm talking about when I talk about things like this, even though I totally borrowed the idea from Tor, right? All of these ideas factor in to what people are going to do when they make a decision to buy from me or not if they're in my audience. That's valuable primarily in the context of what I'm doing right now, which is giving you free information, right? This show is free. Most of the content in my group is very wide open and free. Of course, it's a private group and you have to ask to join, but once you're in there, it's free. I don't charge people to join. That free information is really about creating this exformational content that positions me as an authority figure that can provide value. It gives context. It shows my reputation. So if you watch this show having never heard of me, you decide to join my Cult of Copy group, you go into the group, you see that I have things for sale that teach copywriting and persuasion and how to sell things to people. You go to look at those products, you examine them, you see tons of people saying great things about it. All of those are going to influence you when you go to the buy page and it's just the checkout page on PayPal with a price tag, and you're going to hopefully click on the link and want to buy something from me because of all that stuff that built up into it. It wasn't an explicit message from me. I'm just handing you a bunch of facts and influencers and subjective perceptions putting all those things in front of you, you absorb them, you internalize them, and then when you go to make a decision, you recall which things were relevant to you. And you can do this in really any niche, any genre where there's some kind of authority figure in front of people. So that was authority. What else can we stick in people's heads? I sort of plowed into it and jumped ahead of myself. Accomplishments, insofar as you would count my certificates up here as accomplishments, being that, you know, they're all phony and I paid for them as a joke since I lead a quote-unquote cult. But any real accomplishment, so like as a freelance copywriter, I might tell you, you know, my sales copy has sold $24 million worth of products and services before I retired after a very short, you know, 2-year freelancing career. I might tell you I got, you know, an 80% conversion rate on a particular piece of copy I got. If you're a marketing person that was looking to hire me, those things would be valuable to you. Those are accomplishments. But the trick is I wouldn't necessarily put those in my sales material. I might mention them offhand in free content that is just out there for you to consume and enjoy, because I know later on if you keep following me and I offer for something for sale, you will have retained those little bits of information. Did you notice I literally just did it? I literally gave you some accomplishments in this free video / audio / whatever as part of this show. You don't have to like proactively do this stuff. It just comes up as part of conversation like I'm doing right now, but it's going to affect things later. So if I said, hey, do you want to learn how to write a sales letter? Someone's going to say, well, that guy has crazy good conversion rates. I'm going to check it out. I don't have to repeat it because you already heard it from me and you stored it and saved it. So if I just say, hey, I have a sales letter template for sale, your brain is going to do the work for you and recall all of those references and things to make context of that message to help you decide whether you want to pay attention or not. But when you recall those things out of your brain at a later time, it's your idea. Like it's you're the one making the judgment that, well, I decided this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm the one who thinks he's got these great conversion rates at the point at which I would sell you something. You don't remember that I'm the one who told you that necessarily. Even if you did, it wouldn't matter, because once you internalize it, it's coming from you. But that's just an example with me and my own business. Hopefully you can see how you might be able to use this in your own messaging to your audience over time. Let's see. Values, personal values. What do you treasure? What do you care about? What matters to you? What do you stand for? What do you defend? What are you against? What don't you like? What will you fight fiercely against to prevent people from, you know, falling victim to or participating in your particular genre? These are values, what matters to you. These are the things that make people connect to you, not just as a person they can buy solutions from, but as a person of influence, someone they follow, someone whose opinion they care about. And I've written recently in the Cult of Copy newsletter about how you can tap into this idea of a persona. We've talked about it on this show too in a couple of previous episodes, this idea of overlapping, where you're going to give someone almost a mask of you that they can look through and see out into your common market or niche or whatever, and see through your eyes and interpret that market through your eyes, and therefore say, okay, well, I like the way this guy looks at things. I'm going to sacrifice my opinion-making mechanisms to them and let them make my decisions for me, because I like the way they look at things, and I figure if I had all the information and expertise that guy has, I would probably make those same decisions. So I'll just go ahead and allow that guy to make my decisions for me. Or gal. It could be gal. Part of what helps people line up that way is when they know what your values are. And it can be incredibly, incredibly simple. For example, I have a 2.5-year-old son. When I finish this show, it's time for me to go pick him up from school. My wife is like 8.5 months pregnant with our second son. He's about to pop out. We have a young family. That, for example, seems to have absolutely nothing to do with my business, but the idea of who I am, that I have a young family, I have 2 young sons. Anyone else in my audience that either is doing that currently or has done that is now that much closer to me. And for, again, those listening in audio only, I'm doing the hand motion for a little bit. They're just a little bit closer to me feeling wise. They feel closer to me. It feels more genuine. We feel more connected. So that later on, without even coming into words, if I were to send a sales message out, someone that feels that association with me may feel more connected to it, more driven to interact. It's never going to become a vocalized thought in their mind where they're like, oh, I'm a father or a mother or whatever. I have a family. I have 2 young sons, or I've had 2 young sons. I remember what that's like. I've seen him talk about it. Now I'm going to buy this thing, or at least check it out, because I feel a kinship with him because we've got experiences in common. They're never going to vocalize that in their head, but that feeling is there, that feeling that has no words, that feeling of connection, and they're going to bring it back to the table in a future interaction without me having to repeat it. They just remembered it from the last time I said it, and it's going to factor into their decision-making process in the future. By the way, if anyone has any questions or comments as the show goes on, Zane is keeping an eye on the Facebook thread for this episode in the Cult of Copy for live comments, or if you just want to leave a comment in the YouTube mechanism while you're watching this. There's a little bit of a delay, but he's keeping an eye on it. Anything you want to do to interact with me while we're having the show, please feel free. We'll make sure and try and answer your questions live on the show if you have any.
Well, I did want to point out there is some exformation in motion happening right here
Oh, yeah?
with Jameis's comment,
All right.
right? When you were talking about accomplishments, he shot out with this one right here, right?
Uh-huh.
He says,
He
"I'm
says,
amazed." Oh no, go ahead.
he says, I'm amazed he didn't mention the fact he sold his sales copy review in under 6 minutes. That's actually a funny story, and I'm going to tell it to you now with the idea that it will become exformation in the future. What Jameis is talking about is this painting here, which for those of you listening to the audio-only version, that same mantle on this fireplace on my set here at my office, there's a painting of a monkey in a suit. Well, I say a monkey, he looks more like a chimpanzee. I don't want people to think I'm dumb at biology, but I use monkey and chimp interchangeably. I'm aware that a chimpanzee is an ape, not a monkey. Anyway, chimpanzee wearing a suit, he's got eyeglasses on, he's balancing a pencil on his head. My office is in a historic little arty bohemian type area in my town. And down the street from me, right across from the coffee shop run by a very stern and angry French woman, is an art shop called the Painted Monkey. They call it a monkey. It's not me, even though all the paintings are of chimpanzees. But they have a big open window that has a bunch of paintings of monkeys. There's another one there of a chimp wearing a dunce cap with a dollar sign on it. And I feel like I need to get that one very soon. Anyways, this one, this painting of the chimpanzee with the pencil balanced on its head, I'm a writer. It makes sense for me to get that painting. I thought it was cool. My writing office is down the street. I walked to work one day from my house. I pass the painted monkey. I see the painting in the window. I take a picture of it on my iPhone, and I post to the Cult of Copy group and say, I will do a copy review for the cost of this painting, which is cheaper than what I normally charge. First person to reply gets the deal. And I posted it and then walked back to my office, and my phone like immediately died because I was Facebooking the whole walk to my office and drained the battery. So by the time I got into my office and did what I had to do today, which is completely start up my laptop from zero, which, you know, it's a PC or whatever, so it takes forever to boot up. By the time I got to it, I ended up having to honor like, I think it was like 5 people who had bought this deal from me because they had all kind of replied at once before I could shut it down. All good, taken care of. Point is, I more than paid for the ape painting, the chimpanzee painting that you can see now if you are watching. What's funny about that promo is I said absolutely nothing about the value of the service or my reputation or what you would get. All I literally said was, hey, I used to do copy review. If you would like to get a copy review from me, I don't do it anymore. I want to buy this painting. The whole thing was about the stupid monkey painting, but I sold it out like immediately and oversold it and made more than enough money to buy the painting and then some. The trick is I never had to repeat all that stuff because all of the people in the cult of copy up to that point, which had been going on for quite a long time, knew me. They knew about my new office that I had just opened up. They knew the context of me walking to it and seeing this painting in the window. They knew about the services I had provided because I told anecdotes about it. All of these things were in their own head. So when I put this thing on offer, in their mind, it was super valuable. I didn't have to repeat it. I didn't have to sell it because they already knew all that stuff. All I had to do was give them a context, an excuse to drag all of that exformation up to the forefront, and I believe that's why it sold out so fast. You know, it wasn't because I pushed it hard. It wasn't because I built up a lot of hype beforehand. It was literally 2 blocks maybe from where this art store is to this office where you're seeing me film this episode right now. That is the power of exformation built up over the long term. So thank you, Jameis, for bringing that up because it's a story I actually meant to tell in a previous episode and I just forgot to. But it makes sense for this episode too. And it's a great example of the power of exformation. Like if I was a nobody and no one knew who I was, like someone who doesn't have this kind of relationship with their audience where they've been loading them up with exformation through conversation and shows and demonstrations and things like this, it would probably be pretty hard for you to say, hey, I want to buy like this car. Buy something from me so I can buy this car. Like it just won't work. You don't have that relationship yet, but when you do have that relationship, you can do silly things like that because, like I said, all that value, all that reputation, all that authority is all built up in my audience's mind. So I don't really have to try that hard to get them to buy those things from me in my little bubble context of the cult of copy.
Now, I did have a question,
Yes,
more
go ahead.
specific to the video angle of it. Like, so you've brought up your accomplishments, these degrees that you've bought and whatnot.
Right.
Do you have these lined up from left to right for a reason? Like, is that positioning wise, or was it just like, I felt like putting it like that?
Oh, from just visually?
Yeah, visually for those
I
who are
mean,
watching.
like, it's just I think that was just a visually aesthetic arrangement that I came up with, like, just, because I thought it looked cool that way. It wasn't, if technically, I did look up, so, like, when you see my lower third here where it says Reverend Dr. Sir Commentario,
Mhm.
that's technically the proper order to put it in. Um, like, if I were
Oh,
an
okay.
actual qualified knight slash reverend slash doctor, that would be the proper order. I looked that up online, but the diplomas aren't in that order or anything. In fact, technically, the knighthood is 2 documents, but um, they're just one in front of the other because I didn't have enough mantle space.
All right. Because for a second there, I was like, oh, maybe he also positioned this visually for exformation as well.
Well, it's funny
Nice.
because they are arranged in such a way with the way the camera is there, like they're all cropped properly so you can see them all, like
Ah,
they don't run off the screen, but that wasn't
okay.
necessarily by design because I put them on the mantle and then bought the camera later,
Oh, okay.
but it just worked out that way. Um,
Still cool to look at.
But the idea of having them on the mantle and then filming the show in the office is on purpose because, like, if you watch the show at all, you know I've referenced them multiple times because they happen to be there and they come
Right.
up in conversation. Not necessarily because I'm like, I'm going to buy those so I can talk about them constantly on the show. They're just in the
Right.
shot. So, like, when I'm filming the show, like my laptop is in front of me and I'm looking at my stupid self talking on the screen. So I see them there. So if I look at it, that's something that makes me think of maybe I should have my screen pointing at other stuff that'll give me ideas of what to talk about. But it
Okay.
wasn't done purposely. That's just the way it worked out.
All right.
Um,
Cool.
we're actually a little past, but this is an ad-supported show. So around the halfway mark, I like to do an advertising message, which, again, I'm not going to be offering these to anyone to promote until the show is officially on iTunes and as a podcast. But we are 5 episodes deep. this is typically the point where an advertising spot would show up, so I'll just use it as a house ad. If you are interested in the kind of things we've talked about up to this point, you may be interested in joining my free Facebook group called The Cult of Copy. If you are, the URL is under my name here. If you're watching on video, it's cultofcopy.com. If you go there, it's currently a redirect straight to the Facebook group. You can request to join. If your profile doesn't look all spammy and stuff, I'll usually let you in. And like I said, we have 7,300 members from all around the world who talk about this kind of thing all day, every day. And this show is really meant to create more content for them, but I do make it available to the public. So that's our ad for this episode. But if you are interested in buying an advertising spot in future episodes, so far, strictly on YouTube, we have over 300 views, I think, for every episode so far. I anticipate that continuing to climb, and of course, we'll be jumping into other audiences. So if you think the audience for this show, not just now, not just in the future, but in perpetuity, even for old episodes, is something you would be interested in doing, please get in touch, because that's an option we will have available in the future if you would like for me to talk nice about your stuff right here as part of the show. In fact, I'll let Zane give a plug for himself if you want to, Zane, my director here.
Yeah, no, that would be great. For those of you who are interested, like, hey, how does all this stuff work? I was inspired by Colin's direction of creating your own community. So over on Google Plus, we have a community called G-Tron, which is, I know, a nerdy Voltron reference. I get it, but it's one of those things of all the new platforms, Hangouts, Google Plus, YouTube, and even AdWords. When they all work in concert together, they do some amazing stuff. So that's my plug for my community. It is over on Google Plus, because that's where I'm at. That's all the Google stuff, right?
Right.
So come and check it out. Even if you're a little nervous about Google Plus, we'll show you about it.
Super.
Thanks,
yeah.
man.
What I will say is, all I really wanted to do with this show is to have a podcast, because I listen to podcasts. But through talking to Zane and seeing the stuff he was doing, in fact, it's not really well known that you can even do this stuff, because as you know, if you're watching this live, this is a Google Plus Hangout, which we're broadcasting live right now as it's happening, but it also is streaming directly to YouTube. Some people on this episode, when I promoted it earlier in the week, didn't even know that was possible. So this URL that you're watching this from right now, if you're listening to me, is a YouTube page. After we're done with the live broadcast, it's just going to be a video of the recording of this episode, which I can then strip out the audio and turn into a podcast. So all of this video stuff is just a bonus for me. But Zane is sort of like the old school genius of all this, because he's been messing with it from before it was even a thing. So when it came time to do this show, I was like, hey, Zane, do you want to tell me about it? He's like, not only will I tell you about it, I'll show up and direct the show for you. So thanks to Zane for that. This concludes our commercial message time in the middle of the episode, and we'll have one more at the end. So again, if you're interested in being a sponsor of the show, where myself or Zane or both of us can interact and chit-chat about whatever it is you want to talk about, get in touch, because these sponsor spots are available in the future. Back to the content, now that we're done with the commercial portion. Embedding. This is what we all came to hear about, right? How do you actually embed this exformational content in people's minds? The trick with exformation, to not forget, is it used to be information at some point. It was part of a message. At some point, the audience consumed it, they internalize it, they file it away in their brain, and then later on, it's exformation when you leave it out. They're the ones who will bring it back to the forefront, so that when someone sees a message from me, they'll pull out of their head all of the things that they know about me that need to be used to give context to whatever message I'm sending them. How do you do that? How do you make people open up their brain and want to make room in there for whatever it is you're giving them, so that they'll, forget their grandma's birthday and instead remember the story about this monkey painting? How do you do that? How do you make them open the door? Storytelling is a very powerful trick for this, because it's such a primal, deeply encoded way that we learn things. So whenever I want to tell people something, whenever I want to teach a lesson, you probably noticed if you've tuned into several episodes of the show before now that I like to tell stories, right? When I was explaining exformation to you, I didn't just tell you what it was. I told you that story about Victor Hugo and his telegram because stories stick better, right? Like people remember stories better. We're programmed, even from a very young age, to learn things and accept lessons if they're delivered in story format, right? And again, this goes back to having young children. I read lots of storybooks to my son. I've done it from the time he was a baby and couldn't understand them, and now it freaks me out because he's like 2 years old. I know he can't read, and he's got whole books memorized. Like I can stop mid-sentence on a page, and he will finish it in his little baby voice. And I'm like, where are you keeping that in your tiny brain? Because you're not like using the toilet 100%, but you can remember this whole Curious George story verbatim just from looking at the pictures. That's amazing to me. But he learns from this, and like I try to be careful when I pick out books to read to him that they have lessons that have values that line up with what I actually care about and what I want to teach him, because I know how powerful stories are at teaching things. So that really is the core way to make sure that whatever it is you want to communicate to your audience is going to be absorbed and internalized and remembered, because you can't help remembering a story, but you usually tend to forget things that are just delivered as facts outside of the context if you're reading it. So like if I had given you a post to read about me and my family and it was just bullet points about, first kid is Harold, second kid is on its way, like you wouldn't remember that stuff. But because it's done in the context of a story where we're having a conversation and it's part of what I'm trying to teach you, your brain can't help but remember those things. And I actually think that's one of the reasons people are more likely to remember stupid things from TV shows that they've watched or songs that they like. Like I remember lyrics to songs from decades ago, and I can't remember the conversation I had with my accountant like a week ago, even though one of those things is relevant and one of them is completely not. But it's because of the storytelling factor. These stories resonate with us. We overlap our own life with stories that we hear. We look for lessons in them and they stick. So anytime you want to deliver anything to your audience, if you tell it in an anecdotal format, first of all, they remember it more, and second of all, those details, those story bits that aren't necessarily part of the point, but they're just part of setting things up to deliver the story, those also all get remembered too. Those are the details. So it almost gives you a stealthy way to include things like your accomplishments and your values. And like I told you that story about that monkey painting. So if you remember in your mind that like that guy sold that monkey painting and he didn't even have to try, like you can go in the cult of copy and look it up. Buy me this monkey painting, I think was the headline of that offer. If you want to look at it, it's there. You can go research it if you want. But I told it to you in the format of a story. So more so than like a conversion rate or a case study, it's a funny story. It's going to stick with you, hopefully. And from now on, you will never be able to disassociate me from that monkey painting. And every time you watch this show, where you can see it over my shoulder, you may remember that I told you the story of how that painting came to be in my office. But that story is tied to me as an authority in my field because my clients bought me that painting in exchange for me doing work for them. That's the trick, right? So the trick is I have lots of clients. They're eager to buy things from me. I barely have to try to get them to sell it. I sell things out. That monkey painting is now like a symbol for that. I don't have to repeat it to you. It's just there. If you know that story, you know it's there. So every time you see it, it's a reminder of that story if you know the story, which is very powerful. Now, outside of anecdotal lessons, it's also important. One of the tricks you can do, and I'm not that great at this. It's something I try to do when I practice writing and being better at it. Using sensory information is a way that you can trick people into encoding whatever it is that you're telling them into their own mind, if you can get them to imagine those things. So if I told you I was walking down the street, in fact, maybe you do remember it because I told you that the painting store is across the street from a coffee shop. Do you remember what I said about the coffee shop? I said it's run by a very stern and mean French lady. That is seemingly a superfluous detail, but if you've ever met a stern, mean French person, you know what they sound like in their head. And that's what I remember about this place is the sound of it. I said there's a coffee shop. Maybe that triggered a memory in your head of the smell and the taste of coffee. These sensory inputs, I'm really good at the visual stuff. Like I went to art school. I think I'm a visual person by default. But I try to include audio. That's what part of the reason I'm doing this show is to let people know what I sound like. Most people already know what I look like because I post a lot of visual stuff online. But the look and the sound are sensory hooks so that a lot of this content is going to sink in a lot better than it would otherwise because it's coming in through multiple senses as opposed to you just reading it. Now, hopefully, if you ever read anything that I write again in the future after watching me on this show, you're not only reading the words on the page, but you can picture me saying it, you can hear me saying it, and I try to write the way that I speak to amplify that effect because that's what I want. I want for any message you get from me, I want you to be imagining the parts that are missing without me having to say it. I want you to know what I look like. I want you to know what I sound like. I want that stupid smirking smile to come across if I make a joke and don't put a smiley. I want my core audience to be able to tell when I'm joking because they know my sense of humor because they, again, know what I sound like. They know what I look like. I don't use a whole lot of smells and tastes. Maybe if that's appropriate to your niche, you would use that. You'll notice a lot, like I watch a lot of food TV because like I like to cook for fun and, eating. But those food channels, obviously you can't smell and you can't taste, so they'll put like a mic really close so you can hear the food cooking and bubbling and gurgling and all of that. You can hear it sizzling. The point of that is to trigger your memories of what those smells and tastes will be like, and they'll often use really interesting adjectives to describe the smells and tastes to you because they want to try and get it into your head without being able to actually deliver that information to you. So that's just another example of how tapping into the senses helps people internalize that content in their mind so that later on when you offer them something, all of those things come into play. Next, we have emotional responses. This really helps make you seem real and trustworthy, and it makes people listen a little bit closer, especially if your emotional responses to things match up with what their emotional response would be to certain things. So if you encounter something and it makes you angry and you deliver that in a message and your audience is like, I've seen that and it makes me angry too. That means parts of your message are going to start getting internalized in their mind because you overlap with them in a way, right? So it goes into that persona thing we talked about in earlier episodes. Well, they'll start to see themselves as overlapping with you, and giving them these emotional cues help them internalize any information that you're getting. So if you see something happen, and again to use anger, if you see something happen in your industry and it makes you mad and you talk about how it makes you mad, telling that as a story will allow you to embed a lot of details that your audience will read that story and commiserate with, and they'll internalize all of those details because they're already in a similar state, right? So if you say, that makes me mad, but also this thing upsets me, this other thing really irritates me, this is why it's caused that way, and this is what you can do about it. Those other things are really just your opinion, but because you've integrated them into a matched emotional state, they'll absorb that information and then you can tap into it later. And then the final one, which I've been doing an excellent example of this whole episode, is settings and activities. So anytime you can include your audience in a setting that says something about you or activities that say something about you, these are things that will help that information get embedded without you having to say it. So even though I pointed out what these diplomas were, even on crappy YouTube encoding, because I don't have a great internet signal in this 164-year-old farmhouse, you can tell those are diplomas. You can see the little shiny stickers. They look like credentials. There's a nice fireplace here. That looks kind of fancy. I'm in a nice regal-looking armchair. All of those things like say something about me without me having to say it. Then again, here I am, this bearded weirdo in a baseball hat and a Darth Vader t-shirt that also says something about me without me having to say it. But if you can see me, if you can see this environment, those things say something to you. The setting says something. Some people overdo this, and they'll rent a Lamborghini and they'll rent a mansion, and if they want to do a launch, they'll go park in front of it because they want to give you that lifestyle pornography, right? To say, well, if I'm selling you a way to make money, here I am in my Lamborghini driving along the beach to my mansion. I don't have to tell you how much money I make. It seems self-apparent. That's part of the message that's getting embedded, so that when it comes time for me to ask you to click the buy button, you're like, I can trust this guy. You won't think of why, but the reason you think that that person is telling the truth is because you've seen those markers of affluence and you've internalized them, and now you're using that exformation to help you decide whether you want to buy that thing or not. Um, but that kind of thing can be fake. That kind of thing can be an illusion. I'm not renting a mansion and I don't have a Lamborghini parked outside, but this is my actual office, and I did pick it because I knew I would start doing videos when I got the office, and it's pretty cool. It's my style. I picked something that would express the way that I really am to you, so that I don't have to repeat it. If you watch the show, you'll see it and it'll influence you. So settings say something. The environment say something. Uh, in a previous newsletter issue, I talked about the visual look of things. And if you consume any of my material, you know I'm minimalist, but I'm consistent. So I only use 2 fonts when I'm allowed to do anything in any of my printed materials. So if you've ever seen my newsletter, there's the headline font and there's the body font, and that's it. The logo for the Cult of Copy group is in those same 2 fonts. I only ever use black and white, maybe red as a highlight color. That's just because I'm a minimalist, but I'm making those things consistent because that's a setting. So when you see something from me, you can tell, oh, that looks like Colin's stuff. Like my creepy little logo that's in the corner that you can see there if you're watching on the video. Like, I deliberately chose things that look like medieval looking woodcuts or heraldry symbols because it's called the Cult of Copy, and I wanted it to look kind of evil and mysterious. So I picked symbols that look like that. So like the logo, if you can't see, if you're listening, the logo for the Cult of Copy is an iron gauntlet holding a snake that's eating its own tail. That just looks all cool and medieval, like a cult symbol. That's what I picked it for. But that look, that setting, that context is meant to express something about the brand, which I want you to retain when you go to look at further material. So that's why settings and environments are important.
Right. And we do have a couple of comments, and then I have a question that can kind of wrap all this up. But
Super.
first,
Well, before we get to that, let me
yeah.
say we're just going to skip it now since I don't have one, but this would be the time. I'm pointing to an invisible watch on my wrist, by the way. This would be the time that we would have the second ad block. We're running a little over because I got so carried away talking about our fun stuff. But if you wanted to be an advertiser and sponsor of this show, this would be the second time in the episode that we would talk about whatever you wanted me to talk about. So if you like the content of the show and you think the audience would be a good fit for whatever message that you would like me to get out there, get in touch. I'm going to continue to do these every week. We're also going to be a podcast. Your advertisement will be recorded as part of this broadcast forever, and it will always be part of the recordings available on, like we said, YouTube, and also eventually iTunes and Android and whatever Windows has going on, if I can figure it out. That's where this would go. Ta-da! It's an ad for an ad spot. Get in touch if you're interested in that. But let's go ahead and dive into the questions and comments, because that is the end of the content. Yay!
Awesome. Yay! Well, just some of the comments that I see here. I think this is one of my favorite. +1 to sensory learning stuff. As you started bringing up more and more of the visuals, those are some of the comments that came up. Oh, right,
Super.
right. Once you see the beard, you can't ever unsee it.
I'm going to shave this beard one day, and the audience is going to flip out. And also, my children will flip out. Because my son, I grew the beard as he was growing up, but he's only just now, like, the lights are turning on in his brain. And he saw a picture of me without the beard and didn't realize it was me. So I know he doesn't remember me not having the beard. So that'll be fun when I shave it. I fully expect him to have nightmares about
That's awesome.
it.
We got another one. I like to imagine a little Colin sitting on my shoulder when I make big decisions.
No, that's a good one.
That was
I like that.
particularly good.
It's literally, see, it's funny because this is from Jordan Koeman. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Koeman. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Um, he brings up a good point because that's really what this is like when you deliver that exformation to people, is that you're giving them a full and detailed way to imagine you. So one common question that I get as a copywriter a lot, and you'll see it pop up in the cult of copy occasionally, is people will say something like, what's the best subject line to send via email? And I say, the from field is the best subject to
Mm.
have, because if they know who it's from and that matters to them, it doesn't matter what the subject line is. The reason that works is because of this exformation stuff, right? Like, all of the things that I tell you about me and why I'm interesting and why I know what I'm talking about and why this content is good and why you should learn it and why it's valuable for you, all of that factors in so that later on when you see my weird sounding name somewhere, you'll say, oh yeah, I know that guy. But the only reason you know all that stuff is because I told you. Otherwise, I would just be a name. That's why it's important to throw all this stuff in so that when you do try to get the benefit from being like a marketer who uses repetition to get to your audience, repetition works great when only parts of it have to be repeated and all the rest of the stuff you said already comes along with them in their mind as baggage that they're carrying along. That's what makes repetition very powerful, is because the repetition is really just reminding them of all the stuff they already know. So that's why it's important to do all that stuff.
All right. No, that was good. We're seeing more comments coming in.
Super.
But somebody had brought up. It actually was brought up a couple times about the monkey painting. So,
Oh,
um,
cool.
right. So
If any of the people that brought it up, the trick to do is just to link it in the Cult of Copy post about this show, and then that way people know if they watch it and they hear about it and they want to check it out, they can link to it there.
yeah, and I'll also put it in the description of the YouTube video
Cool.
so that can be seen.
Awesome.
So the question that I actually wanted to pose was that
Awesome.
more specific to the visual aspects, because a lot of times people ask me, well, what should be my background, right? So like, I mean, you mentioned a lot of things of, like, about having your own style and your own feel. Is there any quick exclamation points that I can give them? I could say, all right, listen, this is the kind of background. If you are this and this and this, think about your style, think about your this, think about your that.
I would say the framing of the show, the way that I've done it here, it's not exactly positioned right, but you'll notice I'm pointing straight at the camera. It's at eye level, just a little bit lower maybe than where it would be if that was a person sitting in a chair and we were having a conversation across this coffee table that's sitting in front of me. The actual other chair is right there. I do have two chairs in my office, and maybe we'll do a two-camera setup one day for a show if I have a live interviewee. But that was a trick that I learned from apprenticing under Andy Jenkins, who's the video boss and the video genesis guru, whatever. He's well known for video. But he went to film school and things, so I know a bit about film. Like, I took screenwriting classes and things, so a lot of the things that he brought to marketing videos that other people weren't doing were things that I just paid attention to as being important. The show does not yet at this point have any audio element, but it may in the future. Zane and I have talked about doing like a video intro that would be tacked on to the video portion of the show. And then perhaps after a while when it's on iTunes, I'll do like an audio intro for that. And the music that I pick and the shots that I do, again, are going to be designed to reinforce the value system. So just like the camera being there where it is specifically, it's meant to make it feel like you're in a conversation with me. I could very well, in fact, let me do it for a quick second here. This is typical way that this show would look, right? Like my webcam right here. This is the way most Hangout shows appear. But I specifically bought a camera so that I could set it up 2 or 3 paces away and film it this way.
Nicely
Because
done.
I wanted it to feel like a conversation, because like I picked this office and I designed it and set it up the way that I did because I wanted it to just be a comfortable place to hang out and like read and write and do the stuff that I do. And I'm inviting you into my space as part of that show. So the visual element has to do with that. And then like the intro we talked about would literally be just a video clip of me walking from the bar around the corner where I have lunch and do the show notes at 5 minutes till, walking around the corner back upstairs to my office right here, which is in like an old historic farmhouse in my quaint little southern town. So that idea, it it's one of those things where I don't have a well-designed image, but I am deliberately portraying it in as thorough a way as possible, if that makes sense. So like the clothes that I wear and growing the beard and the cheesy credentials that I put up there, those are just jokey things that I thought of because I think they're funny. Like I picked this office because I like it. A lot of the things that end up in my show are there not because I know that they'll connect with my audience, but because I genuinely enjoy them. Like at some point in the show, we'll probably talk about records, old records, because my record player, second record player is over there. I have one at home too. But I have like 2,000 LPs because I collect old records. That'll probably be part of the show at some point. It's got nothing to do with the content, but it's part of the setting here. It can't be avoided because it's literally right over there. So I would say of the 2 different routes to do it, you can either know how your audience is and choose to portray and present things that you know will resonate with them. So that would be the equivalent of like the guy who has to close a business deal with like top clients who rents like a BMW to drive there and then offers to take them out for lunch. Like they don't necessarily know it's a rental, or even if they do, they see him as the kind of person that like has to rent the best just because he's in town for a minute.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
that is the same sort of portrayal, or the second approach is just broadcast what you really like deliberately, and people will connect with it and feel that vibe. So like I said, I could use the webcam that's built onto this laptop like every other Hangout person does. That would be fine, but you wouldn't actually see the office that I'm in. You wouldn't see the environment, and I feel like it's here. You should see it because like the reason I picked it is because it's comfortable and it's cool and I like it.
Right.
So I want to fully invite you into my space to make it feel to you like it feels to me to be here. And hopefully by showing it to you that way, you get that impression. Does that answer the question at all?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's one of those topics that are kind of like hard to put your arms around. It's how should it look? Well, it depends on how you want the audience to portray you and your content.
Right, right. Another guy, I'm actually kind of ticked off at him because he's in the middle of one of his like fugue states where he disappears from the internet and doesn't like communicate with anybody. But Caliban Darklock is
Oh yeah,
one of my internet buddies, and when he does videos, you can see like the background of the basement of his parents' house that he lives in,
right.
and like there'll be like a heavy metal guitar and a sword and some anime posters and an Israeli flag and just all kind of insane things that you don't expect to see together, but those all tell the story of like what kind of person he is, and they're not even necessarily put there to be on camera, it's a quirk of the fact that he lives in a confined space, so you can't help but
Right.
see those things when he films a video. But at the same time, sometimes he'll like pick up the guitar and start shredding. You know what I mean? So
Right.
that even that level of doing it and putting those things on camera can make a connection to your audience. Um, but yeah, it's really about like what you want to portray. Like we talked about, like,
Mhm.
is there a way for you to convey your reputation? Is there a way for you to convey your authority? Is there a way for you to convey your values? Just through the background, just through the visual. And then, like I said, the positioning of the camera here is meant to put you on the level that I am. I could very well be using any camera position, but I deliberately wanted to pick one that makes it feel like, hopefully, that we're having a chat. You're sitting in a chair across from me versus staring me in the face through, a webcam sort of setup.
Right. No, makes sense. Conscious thought on the topic.
Right, right. Another on-camera trick that I've used for people who are supposed to be like software experts, for example,
Uh-huh.
would be to put the camera behind you over your shoulder so that you
Oh.
turn away from your computer to look at the camera when you address them. Because then you're
Oh.
bringing them into your work environment without you having to say it. The video feels like you're taking time out of your busy day to talk to them. You don't have to say anything, that's just how it feels.
Ah, okay. No, it
Another
totally makes
one,
sense.
yeah, another one, like I talk about the Mr. Rogers effect. So anyone who's of a certain age that remembers Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood
Hmm.
TV show, how did that TV show start out? It didn't start out with him on camera. He didn't walk out from behind the curtain. He walked into the set, which was meant to look like a living room. He walked in the front door in his business suit, took off his suit coat, hung it up in the closet, took off his work shoes, and put on Keds and his cardigan sweater, and then he sat down and the camera looked at him at eye level because he was talking to toddlers. So he reframed the context of I'm an adult, but then brought it down to their level. But it was important to establish that he was an adult walking in,
Mm.
right?
Right.
Like
Right.
he was an adult authority figure positioning himself on the level of his audience. And I always like that setup because that's something old school door to door salesmen would do. Is the first thing they would ask to do when they come into your house. It's like, can I take off my coat? And you would hang up
Oh, okay.
your coat in their coat closet and roll up your sleeves and loosen your tie the same way that they would do when they come home from work to relax.
Oh.
So you
Like
would
that.
break the professional presentation was there for them to knock on your door. Once they came in, they changed the context to be more comfortable because they weren't trying to talk to you as an authority figure anymore. Now they were trying to be your friend.
Mm.
So they would position it like they were your friend. And that's when you're talking about the visual presentation of this exformational stuff, like I'm sure most of the people listening to this never thought of Mr. Rogers as like doing a visual frame to make 2 year olds feel comfortable. But now that I've explained it to you, you won't be able to not see it. Like you'll totally pick it up in other contexts too. Watch how many TV shows use that frame to introduce a character where they like walk into a scene and make themselves at home or sort of own that scene in a certain way. It's only
Huh.
written that way to create that context, to set that character up in that environment and say something about that character without the character having to say anything.
I had no idea. That's awesome.
There's actually, I can't remember where I read this. I didn't read it in a book about William Golding, but I think they were talking about William Golding in another book, and they mentioned this about screenwriting. William Golding, by the way, he's a script doctor in Hollywood, so he's worked on tons of famous movies, but not credited because he's the guy you call when you like screenplays all jacked up and he fixes it. But he's most well known as the writer of the novel The Princess Bride,
Oh,
which was
really?
made into a movie. He didn't write the screenplay, he wrote the novel, which the novel is actually better than the movie, if that's even possible.
Wow.
But um, he also wrote Marathon Man, which is Dustin Hoffman as the marathon runner, and
Oh, yeah.
Sir Laurence Olivier as the Nazi dentist. It's, it's a very cool movie. I think it's on
Yeah.
Netflix if you want to check it out. Um, Again, that book, it's an amazing book. But anyway, that's William Goldman. Golding? I don't know, Goldman, I think. Anyways, the story he was telling about screenwriting is the difference between the things characters say and what the setup, what the scene says, the action happening in the scene says. Imagine a couple on an elevator. The man's wearing his hat. They're standing in silence. They're in guarded postures. The elevator doors open. It's not the floor that they're getting off on. Someone's getting on. A beautiful young woman gets in and turns around and pushes the button, and the man takes his hat off and holds it in his hand. That's all that happens. No one says anything. Think of all of the emotional and story implications are from that simple action that go unsaid. It's just presented purely visual, right? That to me is kind of interesting. That is exformational content. Like there's so much story happening, and all you're doing is seeing a thing happen. There's no one's explaining it to you, no one's describing it, no one's talking. It just happens. Another example I've heard of, and again, I hadn't read this book. I read someone talking about it in the context of this subject. There's a biography of Ted Turner, the billionaire TV producer guy.
Yeah, TNT.
CNN, Turner Broadcasting, Turner Classic Movies, all of those. Big TV billionaire, was married to Jane Fonda for a while. Someone's interviewing him, and he's known as kind of like an environmentalist. Like he's pretty lefty for a billionaire. And in this interview, it's an in-person interview, so they're riding around with him, and Ted Turner's like rednecky for a billionaire, so he drives like an old pickup truck.
Right.
So he's riding around in this pickup truck, and they're just going about their day, and this interviewer's tagging along. And at some point, Turner sees trash on the side of the road, like an aluminum can, stops, picks it up, throws it in the back of his pickup truck, and they drive away. Like he stopped to pick up, a billionaire stopped to pick up litter to dispose of it more properly later. Think of what that one little action done deliberately in front of a reporter, but with no reference made to it, did for his reputation. You know what I mean? It's like a demonstration of so much internal value that says so much, but he didn't say anything. He just did this one little thing, made no reference to it. Maybe he does do it all the time when a reporter's not there, but that's not what's important. What's important is that when a reporter was there, that's when he did it. That to me is fascinating.
Right. Okay. That puts the clip of Robot Chicken in my head into context. For those of you watching or listening, go and YouTube Ted Turner Robot Chicken.
Right. Captain Planet.
Exactly. You got it.
Well, with that said, we've run a little over, but as always, that's the point of the show. We like talking about this subject, and we're very glad if you managed to be able to join us live this week. As always, if you want to join us live in the future, if you're listening live or to a recording, new episodes are always Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's up to you to make sure whether we're in daylight savings or regular standard time, but 2 p.m. Eastern. On Thursdays is when we record new episodes if you'd like to join us live. If not, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/cultofcopy. In the future, this will be an audio podcast on iTunes, Android, and any other places I can manage to get it up. But my name is Colin D. Terrio, the Reverend Dr. Sir Colin D. Terrio. I'm the Pontifex Maximus of the Cult of Copy. If you want to join our discussion group that this show stems from, you can go to cultofcopy.com. That is currently a redirect to the Facebook group. Request to join, and you will hopefully be added unless your profile looks terrible. I let most people in, though. That's how we got to 7,300 members from 90 countries around the world and all 50 U.S. states and territories. We would be happy to have you. Again, if you love the subject that we talked about here today, the discussion group is really the place that you need to be. Once you're in there, we got all kind of things that you will like, newsletters, training videos, or even just free content. Pop in, ask questions, interact, make friends. Join us. We would be happy to have you. That's it for this week. We are going to see you next week. Like I said, Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. See you here. Thanks for coming.